Welcome back, Exiles. So I have finally finished and refined my budget build for the cast on freeze comet via using Spark. And I have a lot of notes here to explain the entire build in this link. Lots of notes, as you can see, explaining everything, and we're going to go over all of this too, so, and I'm going to showcase you know, what I put together and the items I used, you know, yeah, so, for this build, it does lack one thing, so let's kind of just hop right into what it lacks first, right? So, we'll go into here, and we're going to fast forward to the boss fight. Now, it explains this in the notes. We switch to a gold rim helm right here with a spirit corrupt. Switch to shock magnitude instead of freeze. And then turn off cast on freeze, turn on cast on shock. Now, this build does lack bossing capabilities. As you can see here, I'm not using any mana potions. So I don't have any mana potions. I don't have Melting Maelstrom on, and I don't have any kind of mana potions on. So it would have been a lot smoother with a mana potion. I just wanted to show that it completely 100% self-sustains itself without a mana potion, and that it's totally possible. Because Spark doesn't deal a lot of damage with like a budget build, so with using Comet, we're able to kind of achieve that single target DPS. And it would be a lot better with a Mana Flask, you know, equipped obviously. So we go here, we switch out Overcharge for Freeze buildup, turn off Cast on Shock, turn on Cast on Freeze. Now, as that is a con of the build, it does have a huge pro. And we're going to kind of zoom to that pro right here. This is what this build excels at heavily. Breaches. And my breach points, my atlas is filled out. I have all points into my breach. So. For breaches, just melts, as you can see here. Just melts enemies. Destroys. Now, as you can see, I'm blinking in here, too. So what I'm doing is I have 2 sparks equipped. As you can see down here, there's 1 spark, 2 spark. The second spark is attached to my staff, which has blink attached to it. So on the staff, for the spirit, I switch off cast on freeze and switch on blink. Now, this allows for us to cast a quick spell, which is Spark. So we cast the second Spark, blink, cast the first Spark for our DPS, and to have cast on freeze back on. So it's a really strong mapper. A really, really strong mapper. Like, I would say top tier for the budget I spent. Definitely. So, now, let's see if I have, don't think it's on this one, but just to kind of take a double take here for when we go to the boss. What I'm doing is I'm taking this right here, gold rim cap, see, with a 21 to Spirit Corrupt. This is because it also has all elemental resistances on it, just like the 3 Dragons Helm. So it makes it easy to switch to, and cheap. It costed me 10 exalts, so I mean, really, really cheap. Really, really cheap. Now, in my notes here on the build guide, it kind of explains literally all of what I just went through, and then some. So, it explains all of the ways we can get more single target DPS, and that's by using Flame Wall, Conductivity, and Orb of Storms. It's not a ton of damage, but like, it's definitely enough, right? So, and here it explains that we are using a second weapon, which is going to be a Sigil of Power staff, and we want it to have high cast speed. The reason why we want high cast speed on it is so that when we cast the second spark and blink, the interaction speed between the spark and the blink is faster, so it feels a lot more smooth. Sigil of Power also helps with single target DPS if you are able to stay in the sigil, obviously, right? And in that video, I was not able to because I didn't have any mana potions equipped, just to kind of show the quality of life of the build without even a mana flask. Because Melting Maelstrom is, I mean, a very important item for this build, but can be done without it. Although, for like the next grade upgrade after what I made for this budget build, I would 100% recommend Melting Maelstrom. Like, getting that after all of the things in this build guide is like #1 priority for quality of life and obviously bossing, as you could see. So it explains here as well that it allows us to equip a second spark to the second weapon, which is the staff, and blink. So you can blink throughout mapping. And once you become accustomed to it, it's pretty smooth. It feels a lot smoother than I thought it would. And I play on controller, so I would imagine it's harder on controller, and it feels pretty smooth for me when I do get going. So for Comet has a high base crit chance. So like, we are going to be using a lot of jewels that have meta skills gained increased energy. What we're also looking for on those jewels, like second best roll with that is increased critical damage bonus, because of the fact that Comet is going to be dealing most of the damage, right? And Comet has a high base crit chance, so it's already going to have a high crit chance with the tree that is in this build, and the more we scale up critical damage bonus, the more damage Comet will do. So, for Tool of the Jewels, we also grab this. Recover 2% of mana on kill. This makes mapping feel super smooth, like as you saw within the Breach. There's also a node in the tree that gives us 3% mana back every time we invoke or trigger a spell. So every time we're casting our Comet, we're gaining some mana back. So it really doesn't cost mana to cast Comet, which is really cool. For like the resistance on the items, don't follow mine to a T. Fit them where you can. Fit them where you can. And, you know, try to hit that 75% cap. I mean, 75% is the goal, but if you can't meet that 75% and you're up to like 65 on one or two of them, I mean, you will still most likely be able to survive as long as you're not bossing, for sure. We can't take Chaos Inoculation, so like Chaos Resist on gear, don't need it. And the most expensive piece of the gear that I have on this character for this budget build is the Ingenuity. It was 3 Divine. It's a 45%, just to kind of give us some boosts on our rings, because we don't really, I fit resists elsewhere, and that's just felt stronger because it's basically having like an extra ring. And you can get really high mana rolls on rings. Much more so than the belt, because you can also quality them, so that also gives it more of a boost for what we're looking for. The jewels were really cheap. I personally, on the build that you just saw in the video, I have 1 jewel with meta skills gain increased energy and 2% mana on kill, and it costed 50 exalts. All the other ones were like under 15 exalts. And I kind of went over this already, the Melting Maelstrom Flask. So, and my goal for the build was just to make it accessible to everybody. It's a really fun build. It's my favorite build. It's actually kind of, sort of, exactly like the build that I was playing at League start, like before the big nerf to cast on freeze, or just cast on skills in general. So, I pretty much brought back what they didn't want, I feel like, but it's not as powerful, because obviously if we take it before nerf and we add in all the increased energy skill gain, the amount of comets that would be coming onto the screen would probably be like way too much. So I feel like that nerf was necessary in that we can still do cast on comet, you know what I mean, with freezing enemies. So I am also going to be making an energy shield version of this build, so I don't think it will be able to deal as much damage because we're going to be losing the amulet with spell skills, plus all the spell skills, but at the same time we're going to be gaining energy shield. So I'm going to fit into some jewels, energy shield, not really focusing on critical damage bonus. I think it's going to be a step below this one, I would say, actually, because obviously the amulet costed a bit more, and the jewels will be probably less because energy shield is cheaper than what we're going for on this build. So, biggest part of this build is this right here, the 3 dragon solid masks. This is literally what makes Spark freeze. This is what makes Spark cast comets on mobs like crazy. Definitely need it. This part is huge too because that's how we get our spirit for cast on freeze, as well as the helmet, because we get an enchant with Spirit Corrupt. Literally costs like at most 20 exalts for the Spirit Corrupt and a decent all elemental resistances helmet. And as I spoke before, the Ingenuity belt, and it should say 45% on there. 45%, and for whatever reason it doesn't. Though, again, there is a POB link, so you can obviously take this and put it into POB, which I do have. But main focus for these jewels is critical damage bonus and meta skills gain increased energy. For the wand, we want all level to all spell skills, because we're using Comet, we're using Spark. So it's important to get that, because Comet really is our damage dealer, but we also want Spark to deal more damage as well, because it's what's freezing things. For the gloves and the boots, I went for evasion rating and energy shield, because the bases are cheaper for what I was looking for. It's like, to get a pure ES base with a high ES is a lot more than going for a double evasion rating and energy shield base. These are actually cheaper. And if you grab dexterity on the gloves, you don't actually need to grab dexterity in the tree. So if you have that 28 dexterity, you don't need it within the tree, which is really cool. So, for the rings, on one of them we're looking for cast speed, on the other one we're looking for intelligence. And then I have the resistances and mana on both, obviously. And mana regeneration as well would be a big helper, because we don't have Melting Maelstrom. So, and for the amulet, I just went for mana, energy shield, spell skills, cast speed, and got a resist on there. So, for the focus, we're looking for spell skills, energy shield, mana, and resists, because it's cheap. To get a net damage modifier on there is a lot more, like increased lightning damage, increased spell damage, or any crit damage bonus, critical hit chance. The price goes up by a ton, instead of just focusing on some more resistances to make the build function. So for the skills, we have Archmage, Lightning Mastery, Cast on Freeze with Comet, with Spell Cascade, Spell Echo, and Energy Retention. Energy Retention really helps us to cast comets more and more, because of the fact that we're refunding a lot of the energy. With this and the Node in the Tree, it's a 60% chance to refund half the energy. And then we have Blink, which is attached to, again, our second weapon, so that we can cast our second Spark. See, it has no support gems, it's just Spark. It's the Spark that's attached to the staff, so that we can use the Spark attached to the staff, blink, and switch back to our damage-dealing Spark, so that makes mobility through maps much better. For Spark, we're using Considered Casting, Glaciation, Arcane Temple, and Pierce. The reason why Pierce is really good is so that when you do cast Spark and you're in mobs, the Spark does not end when it hits an enemy. It continues through the enemy. Gives it much more quality of life. For Flame Wall, which I only use during like a boss fight. You know, Fire Mastery, Fortress, and Unleash. Conductivity as well, I only use it during bosses. So for the supports is Heightened Curse and Focus Curse. And this is the boss damage dealer, the Cast on Shock, which we use Comet for as well. And for this we use different supports. One, because we can't have doubles of the supports, and two, because focusing on single target DPS will help deal more damage to the boss. And for that we're going to use Concentrated Effect and Elemental Focus and Impetus. We use Orb of Storms for single target DPS as well as Sigil of Power. For Sigil of Power, what we use for supports is Magnified Effect to make it bigger, and Persistence to make it last longer, so that we are able to actually get some use out of it if we so do use it. So that is kind of the explanation of the entire build. I wanted to do kind of more of an in-depth video approach to this build, to, again, make it more accessible to others, and to maybe help those who don't understand it to understand it. And if there are any questions that you have, I am totally 100% free to open them, or answer them, sorry. So, yeah. Thank you for watching, thank you for your support, and stay sane, Exile.